Hello, and welcome to the Shadow Demon Talks. Today, we are joined by a new face in the voice acting community and student of Steven Blum, Nicky Benoit.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. So, you're just starting your career as a voice actor. What role did Digimon play in you choosing this career?
Basically, I first got into Digimon when Adventure first aired in Canada on YTV. I was in grade 4 back then. And I always connected with one character in each series, but with Digimon Tamers, when it came out in grade 6, there was just something about Guilmon that I connected with immediately. I just took one look at that character and I was like, wow, that is me. And over the years, I've learned that that's basically what you want to aim for as a voice actor. When you're portraying those roles, it doesn't matter if you're a main character or if you're just soldier A one-time character that gets shot immediately. Your goal is to make people feel and connect with those characters. Steve's really put a lot of things into perspective with each of his classes. It's kind of hard to sum it up in just one shot there, but yeah, there's a lot to go over here.
Right. So, actually, with what you just said, something I say a lot when the sub versus dub argument gets brought up is that part of the reason people end up choosing sides is because if they listen to one first, the voice actor brings life to a character. So if they listen to another one, even if they both do a really good job, it doesn't sound like the character they knew. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, it's a lot of fans of the Digimon original series. What they fail to realize when they bring up the dub versus sub argument is, unfortunately, in the Japanese version, a lot of the culture doesn't get directly translated over to North American culture because a lot of us just wouldn't understand it. The directors have to basically readapt it towards a North American audience. So it's pretty much out of the actor's hands 100%. They just have to do exactly what they're directed. That's their job. And unfortunately, there are some people, like when Steve was actually first going to conventions, he had a really rough time because he had to deal with some of those elitist fans, and he had to take a break from it for years until he was ready to get back into it. And he had a much better experience the second time around. And now that's just before the pandemic hit. That's what he was making on the side. Apart from getting work now, he's in Hollywood movies now. He was, not too long ago, he was in Bumblebee film. He was Wheeljack. And yeah, he's just going from being working in the mailroom of a studio in the 80s, being the only guy with the deepest voice in the whole workplace. That's how he got noticed by some of the directors there, and that's how he got started in voice acting. Was they brought him on for this anime project back then in the 80s? They called it Japanimation, so it wasn't really that widely known. And they brought him up, and they showed him on the clip. There was this monster ripping the arm off another monster and beating it over the head with it, I think is what he said in the classes. And they said, okay, could you do something like that? And then Steve was like, okay. I can't exactly do it exactly like him, but you can tell he's influenced a lot of the roles that I go for. And
Right.
yeah, now he holds the world record as most prolific voice actor in video games.
Oh, interesting. So you mentioned Steve Blum a lot. What was it like learning from an industry professional?
To be honest, when I first met him, it was actually 2 months before they launched the Bloomvox Studios Facebook community. So I went to see him at Central Canada Comic Con. Unfortunately, it was canceled, but last year it was canceled. But I just it was an unreal feeling. Like a lot of the time they say, be careful when you meet your heroes, because most of the time they don't turn out to be you expect them to be. But Steve is nothing like that. He's the most humble person you will ever learn from. And the way he sets up his classes, he has a very organic approach to it. He wants to start from an authentic, organic place so that you can actually connect with the fans that hear those characters' voices. So because of the search algorithm and trying to figure out seeing Steve at Comic-Con, the search algorithm popped up months later in December 2017 and brought me to the Facebook community, and then just one thing led to another, and now I was recently in an indie game thanks to Steve's classes.
I see. Uh, is there anything you'd like to talk about that indie game?
Yes, it was released on Steam. It's called Potion Commotion, and it's a point-and-click game, and point-and-click games, they don't really have much voice acting, so my director for that game, Luke, he is the owner of Nerdy Bird Studios. It's an indie company he set up. I wanted to bring, like I said before, something authentic, something that'll get people connected with those characters, and then this whole team is really, really talented. Everybody just went all in with those characters. Sometimes people would only land the role of a goblin, and it was just one little noise, and it was just so fitting for the character for those voice actors. And in my case, I was one of the task givers. My audition, I went all out. I did all kinds of voices, but the one I went with, I went with something unexpected. I went with this unicorn that has a crush on a dragon, and rather than wanting a love potion, she wants to impress him with a fire-breathing potion. And Luke just thought that was so out of the box and that it would really stand out. So that's what I ended up going for with my character there.
Oh, neat. So, while Steve was obviously a huge inspiration, was there anything about the world or even the other voice actors that helped contribute to your fascination with the industry?
Yeah, before Steve, I was really really looked up to Steve Prince. He's also known as his full name, Derek Steve Prince. The way he voiced Vemon was very much the way I spoke as a kid. My personality was just like Yumon, but I had the slight lisp. Even when I chew gum, it comes out. So I could definitely, it's just the characters they portrayed, I could totally relate to them. And it was cool to see as I got older, we're still working together in different other projects like Naruto. And I think it's hard to say if Steve Blum is in last Evolution, but I know for a fact that Steve Prince is. So it's going to be great to see a bunch of them back working together again.
Oh, it's good to hear that Vemon is reprising his role, Steve Prince is Vemon, because I know a few voice actors didn't come back to last Evolution.
Unfortunately, some just were either, it had to do with clashing with the union, because they're now work under unions now, or they might have been too busy with other projects and they just had too much on their plate. And one thing that was mentioned in the class, one of the classes before, was we actually had Mary Elizabeth McGlynn as one of our guest teachers, and she was discussing what it's like to be a director. And basically, when you are a voice actor, those characters you do not own, even though you were a huge aspect of yourself is going into that character. Unfortunately, because it's not your work, unless you are the creator yourself, it's out of your hands. And if you do end up getting recast or missing casting call when there's a brand new series with your character, you might unfortunately not be able to continue reprising the role. It's just an unfortunate downside with voiceover.
Right. So, while Tamers is clearly your favorite season, from what I can tell, are there any other seasons that might also be considered special to you?
Well, I recently binge watched Adventure 1 and 2 with my kids, and looking at the reactions, it was like seeing experiencing my first time watching it all over again. It was so cool. And I've noticed that it is unfortunate. It was one of those dubs where unfortunately wasn't as authentic because they didn't know what North American audiences were going to go for. So I much prefer the dub of Try over the original, and it's an unpopular opinion, but so far I'm actually really liking Try a lot more. It's I've also seen a few of the new Adventure 2020 version, and that's probably going to end up being my favorite of the Adventure franchise. It's just so different I like the direction they've been taking. It's so creative.
Right. I have noticed that it is very different, but I also think that it'll likely appeal to a wider audience.
Yeah, I'm thinking because the dubbing, how the way the dubbing is done nowadays is we do it way more authentically, and we actually pay respects to the original Japanese culture as much as we can. So when they dubbing when it's time for the dubbing to be done, I think it's going to do really well and bring in even more fans.
Interesting. Now, are there any specific characters or Digimon that you would love to voice if given the chance?
Hmm. I'm I guess my three favorites over the well, actually, I'd hate to take that work away from those voice actors because that would be. I'd prefer for the original voice actors, R. Martin Klein for Gomamon, Steve Prince for Vmon, and Steve Blum for Guillemon. But if it was out of the directors wanted it to be completely redone and sounding more like the original Japanese versions, I think that this voice might suit any one of those. Even an Agumon, because in the original he kind of had that gruff voice going on. Even Numemon, he'd be fun to portray. There's villains too would be interesting because I can go here. Even really terrible for you barely understand what I'm saying. You can tell that Steve Blum's been a huge influence for that kind of stuff.
Right. I always find it interesting listening to voice actors who can play multiple roles within the same show and you never notice.
With Steve, he used a younger child voice for Kenta. It was more like this, and then Guillemon was like, he's Guillemon. Nobody can replicate that voice. From what I found, a lot of people can try, but the way Steve does it, natural bass sits in there still. It's like kind of a mixture of like high and low. Even with Guillemon, he has like a wide range in that character himself. He can go from squeaking to growling in seconds.
Right.
Then there's Yamaki, just his natural speaking voice. And he uses that voice for a lot of characters.
So, one thing you've mentioned to me before is that you're transitioning to male. Has voice acting affected your self and public image at all? And also, has this provided any difficulties within the industry itself?
When it comes to difficulties, sometimes I find myself holding back on auditions because I am a transgender male. Sometimes when I go for female roles, I'm like, oh, wait, I don't want to take that away from a female voice actor because that's going to take away from the authenticity. But then if I go for male roles, sometimes my voice isn't low enough. And when I do voice gruff characters, it's not low enough. It's more like a cartoony kind of those little cartoony characters. I think that might suit a small Digimon. For the big Digimon, that would be like, I am on a low dose of testosterone though, so my voice is going to be changing. It's basically like a second puberty. So chances are my voice I might lose the high range and then just develop more in the lower range. It's hard to say right now.
Right. Do you think that would mean that you'd have to keep up with practice a lot more than others as your voice?
Oh yeah.
As your
I still try to maintain the higher pitched, more softer feminine range as much as I can because a lot of the directors I work with really like how I can portray characters as low as this, and then the little girls that are as high as this. So it's like, but that's the interesting thing about voiceover is you can pretty much, as long as the roles are being cast a more diverse way, where if it's a main role, like for example, with one of my projects original projects that I'm currently writing the screenplays for, the main characters is a young transgender boy, but because he is African American, I don't want to voice him. I'd rather ask somebody that can authentically represent that because I only have, I know, sorry, pulling my words a bit with anxiety here. I only understand how it feels to deal with transphobia and discrimination in that aspect. But when it comes to racism, I am second last generation Mohawk, so the most racism I've dealt with is basically my family just trying to erase my Mohawk ancestry. But my partner, on the other hand, I've seen it with my own eyes. It's like night and day what I go through and what he goes through. So when it comes to main characters, I'm all for like being the actors who will authentically represent those roles. When it comes to minor characters, I'm gonna just anything goes. It doesn't matter. I'm gonna want people of all backgrounds to go for any character they want.
Right. It certainly is a balance of both trying to promote both diversity and being authentic while also ensuring that newer voice actors all get their shot at the industry.
Yeah, that's why I'm hoping if I eventually accomplishing all my goals and succeeding at my projects, I want to make it so that it's easier for newer voice actors to get into it because it's really hard when you're not involved in a union yet and you don't have as much experience. You can get taken advantage of a lot, and I've actually dealt with a few negative experiences like that. And now with one of them, the director, she's actually looking into consulting a lawyer to get us the payment that we're owed because it was pretty bad what we dealt with on that one there.
Right. I'm sure that there is definitely a more negative side to the industry. Hopefully, it improves. So, outside of professional interest from the animated series, have you explored other Digimon content from the games and Tamagotchi to the cards and the like?
Back when the very first Digimon World was released on PlayStation, I played that. Like it was so addictive, but I couldn't really get the hang of it. I just remember having a lot of good memories playing that one. And there were a few Digimon games on DS that I played, but other than that, unfortunately, I've been just when I was in grade 11, that's when I first started getting into screenplays, and I was trying to write my own Digimon Tamer sequel that I wanted to eventually pitch to Konaka-san and Toei Animation. It's unfortunately, in order to pitch something like that to a company like Toei Animation, you need to have a company yourself with projects of your own. So that's what got me interested in I basically for my original project, I took inspiration from the main characters of Digimon Tamers and went with it. So when I do have the extra funds, I'm definitely going to look into getting more of the games, especially Digimon Survive. I can't wait to play that one.
Right, it does look interesting. So, speaking of the screenplays and the like you've written, I know that a lot of the community writes fan fiction and would love to see it made official. Uh, so, do you believe that some of the projects that you're working on would possibly lead to you being able to declare yourself a company and be able to possibly pitch Digimon products to Toei?
Yes, that's exactly what the plan is. Because originally I was so hyper focused on the spin-off, or I mean the sequel I was writing. I didn't want anything to do with the original project. But then after I actually embarrassed myself in the Bloom Book Studios class in the New Year's the December one in 2018. I actually asked Steve to be my co-creator for the unofficial spin-off, and he was so polite and so nice. Like he said no and couldn't take no for an answer at first. I feel so bad, but I was also thinking a little bit too then because it was the holiday season, but he's cool with it. I apologized to him profusely at the next class, but he told me not to worry about it. That's just my social anxiety effect there. Yeah, after that happened, I sat down with those audio dramas. I actually listened to them for the first time and looked into Steve said about how we don't own those projects. They are somebody else's work. So I looked into Chiaki Konaka-san, how he works as a writer. And then, that's what inspired me to go down into a more mature, darker route. I've always been inspired by horror. It was actually when I first got into Digimon Tamers, that was around the time I really started watching horror movies on a regular basis. And Konaka-san was massively inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. If you look at the D Reaper arc, I like to dub it the Reaper War. I think that's a cool little nickname I came up with it for my spin-off there. It's he was influenced by Lovecraft, and when I was rewatching Digimon Tamers in high school, I asked myself, how did they manage to make this appropriate for kids? Like, this is like watching a horror movie all over again. And yeah, so moving back onto I was mentioning with that original project, I've seen so many horror movies over the years. Eventually became desensitized to them and lost that adrenaline rush I had once as a kid, but wanted to make something that would give people that rush. I was constantly trying to find the right movie that would fuel that inspirational again, and last year I finally found it. It was Ari Aster's Hereditary. It was the first film in a long time that made me feel scared like when I was a kid, and at the same time it was a different kind of fear because I'm a parent now, and it was just fear warped into something new. And the way that affected me, I just wanted to do that myself, and not only with my own original stuff, but with Digimon. I'm hoping to. There's actually a lot of fans out there that the idea of a darker, mature horror story with Digimon, because if you think about it, the different monsters that some of them are based off of, like a Dragomon, I believe, in the Dark Ocean, he was based on Cthulhu, I believe. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that we could go for with that. And after watching Hereditary for the first time, I kept thinking about, okay, how was that cult pulling all these strings behind everything? Started thinking about what could happen next in a world like that, where a cult has goals of taking over society as a whole. And that's basically how I figured out who some of the antagonists of this original project were. And I'm going to have to keep it vague because with projects, you can't risk releasing anything too soon, leaking anything too soon. But it's basically the quick synopsis of this. I'm actually going to try contacting Konaka-san if I get the right funding to get him involved so that it could be even more like Tamers. But, to sum it up briefly, the main antagonist is the innocent child many of us once were, very much like Guillemon. Starting out as a young child at the start of this series, the main protagonist feels out of place in a country led by a controlling cult. However, his innocent outlook on life is distorted early in the series, when the cult abducts him and an entity bound to him since his birth is awakened. And I think there was a missed opportunity with the Megidramon arc there. The way that thing was portrayed, I have a headcanon where it wasn't actually Guillemon. It might have been maybe Guillemon was when his egg was formed in the border of the worlds. Maybe the data of multiple Digimon were put together. Very much how Lotmon stated that the Davis were made out of the recycled data of old Digimon. But maybe it's possible that Megidramon and maybe other powerful Digimon were figured into that egg.
I see.
Kind of like a similar aspect to Naruto, only he doesn't get to befriend that thing like Naruto did with Kurama.
Right. Similar to like Apocalypse and the like.
Yeah, I was actually going for there's Apocalypse, Millenniumon, Megidramon, and there is one more that has to do with the apocalypse. I slipped my mind, but there is a fourth one that I was thinking of working in, as well as the 7 Demon Lords.
Right.
and how Bialon reformed himself, they could
Were you
add.
thinking of the combination of the seven demon lords?
Sorry, what was that?
Were you thinking of the combination of the seven demon lords? I know that they
Thinking of getting them involved somehow, and the way Bielzman has reformed himself, maybe another character could go down the dark route. And I don't know, like we could get the demon lords involved somehow. I was thinking of, when it comes to the Digimon project, after were to succeed at my original project, I'd actually want other Digimon fans involved in the writing process as well, especially people who are also involved in the industry, like people who are experienced with this kind of stuff. Maybe even if they started out writing fan fiction like I did, that'd be even better. Yeah, I'd love to see this community flourish even more and get more people involved in resolving this the dub versus sub argument too, because they actually had there were a couple issues that they ran into that were very similar. Because when they were casting for the American dub, they actually had a hard time finding the right voice for Guillemon. So Mary Elizabeth McGlynn ended up suggesting that Steve do a cold read for Guillemon. He just went with that first voice that came to mind. It was one that he did as a child, and the way he did it was so naturally and authentic because of that. And coincidentally, with the original Japanese version, they actually had a hard time casting for Takato until they heard Makoto Tsumura's audition. And yeah, it just went from there. In Chiaki Konaka's words on his Digimon Notes website, he said, vote was unanimous. Miss Tsumura became our Takato. We couldn't imagine anyone else voicing Takato. That's how perfect she was for the role. And that goes back to just being authentic and connecting with the character.
Interesting. Looking into the voice actors for characters is always pretty fascinating.
There's like, I don't know if you've heard of this story. Steve's mentioned it at a few conventions and as well as the classes, but there was this one convention he went to, I believe it was in New Zealand, and this guy got to the front of the autograph line and he said that his son was autistic, nonverbal, and he would sit and rock in the corner most days. One day, his son bolted over to the TV and just sat there transfixed on Digimon tamers. He's identifying with something Guillemon was doing, and the father said he'd never seen this kind of reaction from him before. So he asked his kid, what's going on? And the kid said, shh. Dad said that shh was one of the biggest responses he'd ever had to anything in his life. And at that time, his son was about 8 years old, I believe. So at the end of the episode, the kid turned to his dad and he said, I like that, Daddy. And the father said those were the first real words that he actually spoken clearly. It just goes to show you how powerful the teams, these entire teams that put these anime, how powerful each and every team member is, because putting a project together, directing anime, whether the project's an anime or a video game, it's like you're working with a puzzle. You need to find the right piece that fits into each aspect. Every person who contributes to that project, whether they're a voice actor, a director, or a producer, or an animator, or just even the social media promoters, they're all important pieces of that puzzle, and they're needed in order to move those things forward.
Right. I think that the minutia is generally lost on a lot of people until you point it out to them. As I've really started to, I suppose, critique other works and analyze them and associate with other critics, I've really noticed how powerful like every piece is. Like every piece of background music can entirely change a scene. How much life voice actors bring into characters. A director can make or break a show, no matter how well it might be written.
Yeah, Mary Elizabeth McGlynn did a flawless job with Digimon Tamers. That was Oh, I always get nostalgic with Adventure because that was the very, very first series that I watched. But Digimon Tamers was always going to be my favorite because of it was just it's actually the very first series that was closer to the original. There wasn't too many extra jokes added. They even the other writers were directed to add jokes here and there to make it less scary for kids, I guess. But yeah, if you can like comparing the two, it was like night and day in a way. Those two dubs.
Right. Um, and there's also the smaller cast. I think that might have also contributed to a better focus from the entire team, possibly.
Yeah, there was a lot more room for more character development, and even the Digimon were their characterization was a lot more defined than Adventure because it was just the main three. Actually, like to consider main four because Impmon had such a huge role in it too. I like to consider those four as main four of Digimon Tamers.
Right.
And yeah, all four of those voice actors, Steve Prince, Steve Bloom, Mona Marshall, and Marie Devon, they're all just amazing at what they do.
So, as we conclude, I suppose, do you have anything you'd like to say to the Digimon community?
Yeah, just if you're pressured by other people who don't get it, don't give in to them. Because I made that mistake when I spent years being embarrassed about Digimon, but it ended up being one place I could go to when I was living in the closet, and it was just so cathartic to have that little world I could escape to. And don't give in to the pressure and let people take that away from you. If you're an aspiring creator, like if you're working on your own screenplays, or if you're trying to do what I'm doing, or if you want to make video games and eventually chit toy animation, it's go for it. Just don't stop. That's what Steve told me. When I told him I wanted to make the spin-off, don't stop and don't give up. Just going, even if you have to go back and try to make your own original stuff to build up to that, it is very possible. So but also whether you're pitching an idea to a large company like Toy Animation, or you're just an artist or voice actor in general, you do need to keep in mind that you are your own brand. So it's try not to get too excited. I made that mistake with the Bloomfox class, but luckily it was just the class and not an official pitch. But it's in the archive, so if I end up accomplishing these goals, I can look back and laugh. But until then, I can't rewatch that for a long time. And yeah, I'm just so thankful that the Digimon community seems to be growing, and hopefully we can more kids of the next generation in, just like I have with my kids.
All right. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be here.
Until next time, guys, stay wholesome.